The low yellow lights of East Coast International Airport cast long shadows across the nearly empty parking lot. The midnight air hung heavy with silence, broken only by the distant rumble of the occasional late-night flight. It was in this eerie quiet that Max, a German shepherd with ears perked in sudden alertness, stopped dead in his tracks. His handler, Detective Sarah Thompson, felt the leash go taut as the dog's body transformed from casual patrol to rigid attention. "What is it, boy?" she whispered, but Max was already moving, pulling her toward an old yellow taxi parked in the far corner of the lot. The vehicle sat motionless, covered in a thin layer of dust, too still, too abandoned. As they approached, Max's demeanor changed dramatically. The loyal canine officer began to growl, low at first, then erupting into frantic, ferocious barking that echoed through the deserted lot. His claws scraped desperately at the trunk, his body trembling with urgency. Sarah's blood ran cold. In 15 years of police work, she had never seen Max react with such violent certainty. Whatever was locked in that trunk, it wasn't luggage. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from. Now, let's continue with the story. Detective Sarah Thompson hadn't always been the hard-edged leader of the East Coast Airport's Special Victims Task Force. 26 years ago, as a 12-year-old girl growing up in suburban Pennsylvania, she'd watched her 8-year-old sister Emily vanish from a playground. Despite massive searches and her parents' desperate pleas on national television, Emily was never found. The case eventually went cold, but the fire it ignited in Sarah never dimmed. She carried her sister's faded photograph in her badge wallet, a small, smiling face forever frozen in time. After graduating top of her class at the academy, Sarah had single-mindedly climbed the ranks, specializing in child abduction and trafficking cases. Her colleagues respected her razor-sharp instincts and unwavering dedication, but few were allowed close enough to see the wound that had never healed. The guilt of having been the older sister, who looked away for just one critical moment. Max hadn't always been a decorated police dog either. 3 years ago, while investigating a dogfighting ring, Sarah had discovered the German shepherd cowering in a filthy cage, emaciated and covered in battle scars. Something in the dog's intelligent eyes, a resilience that mirrored her own, had called to her. Against protocol, she'd personally adopted and rehabilitated him before enrolling him in the canine training program, where he'd shattered every record. The trainers called it uncanny, his ability to detect human distress even through concrete walls and sealed containers. But Sarah understood. Max knew what it meant to be imprisoned, to be treated as an object rather than a living being. Now, their partnership was legendary in the department. Max lived with Sarah in her sparse apartment, the only being she truly allowed herself to be vulnerable with, the only one who had seen her cry on Emily's birthday each year. East Coast International Airport had become their hunting ground. With over 50 million passengers annually, it was a prime transit point for trafficking networks moving victims across state lines and international borders. Sarah's specialized unit had been formed just 18 months prior, after 3 separate incidents had exposed the airport's vulnerability. The team operated from a nondescript office near Terminal C, monitoring security footage and maintaining constant patrol presence. They had made small busts before, caught individual handlers transporting victims, but Sarah had always sensed there was something bigger, a sophisticated network operating just beneath the surface. Tonight, as Max's bark echoed across the parking lot, she felt the first tremor of what would become an earthquake. Sarah approached the taxi cautiously, her hand instinctively moving to her holster. Years of experience had taught her that anything that triggered such an intense reaction from Max warranted extreme caution. The yellow cab sat motionless in the dim light of the airport parking lot, seemingly abandoned. No driver, no passengers visible through the windows. She circled the vehicle once, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, while Max remained fixated on the trunk, his barking now interspersed with high-pitched whines of distress. "Easy, boy," she murmured, though her own heart raced. She radioed for backup, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "This is Detective Thompson. I need assistance at Lot E, Section 7. Possible suspicious vehicle." While waiting for her team, Sarah peered through the windows. The interior was clean, too clean. No personal items on the dashboard, no receipts in the cup holders, nothing to indicate recent use despite the layer of dust on the exterior. Something wasn't right. She tried the door handle and found it unlocked. The smell that greeted her was stale, but with an underlying scent she couldn't place. Max was growing increasingly agitated, scratching frantically at the trunk. Officer Jenkins arrived within minutes, followed by 2 airport security guards. "What have we got, Thompson?" "Not sure yet," she replied, handing him her flashlight. "Cover me while I check the trunk." With Jenkins positioned to respond to any potential threat, Sarah used the universal key that all law enforcement officers carried for emergency access. The lock clicked, and she slowly lifted the trunk lid. The beam of her flashlight revealed what looked like a bundle of clothing at first. Then it moved. A small boy, no more than 4 years old, lay curled in the fetal position. His hands and feet were bound with duct tape, and another strip covered his mouth. His eyes, wide with terror, reflected the flashlight beam like those of a trapped animal. His skin was pale, almost translucent, and dark bruises circled his tiny wrists where the bindings had cut into his flesh. "Jesus Christ," Jenkins breathed beside her. Sarah's training kicked in immediately. "Get me EMTs here now," she ordered, never taking her eyes off the child. "And call Captain Parker." She carefully reached into the trunk, speaking in the softest voice she could manage. "Hey there, sweetheart. My name is Sarah. I'm a police officer, and this is my friend Max. We're going to help you. You're safe now." The boy didn't respond, didn't even blink. Sarah recognized the signs of severe trauma and shock. With gentle movements, she removed the tape from his mouth, wincing as the adhesive pulled at his skin. He didn't cry out. She wondered grimly how long he had been taught to stay silent. Max had calmed somewhat, but remained vigilant, positioning himself protectively near the trunk as Sarah worked to free the child. When she finally lifted him out, she was shocked by how little he weighed, like holding a bird with hollow bones. His body was cold, suggesting he'd been in the trunk for hours. The boy didn't struggle as Sarah wrapped him in her jacket, but he didn't relax either. His body remained rigid, his eyes fixed on some middle distance. The paramedics arrived within minutes, taking over with professional efficiency, checking vitals, wrapping him in thermal blankets, and preparing him for transport to the nearest hospital. "I'm going with him," Sarah told Jenkins. Not a request, but a statement. "What about the scene?" he asked, gesturing to the taxi. "Process everything, and I mean everything. Dust for prints, check for fibers, fluids, anything. Run the plates and VIN. I want to know who this taxi belongs to and how long it's been sitting here. Check all security footage for the past 48 hours. Anyone approaching or leaving this vehicle, I want faces." As Sarah climbed into the ambulance with Max at her side, she wasn't about to leave him at the scene. Her mind was already racing through protocols, procedures, next steps. But a part of her remained fixated on the boy's eyes, so similar to how she imagined Emily's might have looked in her final moments. At the hospital, the child was immediately taken for medical assessment. Sarah paced the waiting room, Max sitting attentively at her feet whenever she paused. Captain William Parker arrived an hour later, his weathered face grave. At 62, Parker had been her mentor since she'd joined the force. The closest thing to a father she'd had since her own dad had retreated into alcoholism after Emily's disappearance. "What do we know?" he asked without preamble. "Male child, approximately 4 years old, found bound and gagged in the trunk of an abandoned taxi at the airport. No identification, no missing persons report, matching his description in the past 24 hours. He hasn't spoken a word. Doctors are examining him now for—" She hesitated, the words sticking in her throat, "for signs of abuse or trafficking indicators." Parker nodded grimly. "And the vehicle?" "Jenkins is processing it. I'm waiting to hear." Her phone buzzed. "That might be him now." It was. Jenkins' voice crackled through the speaker. "Thompson, we've got something weird here. The taxi is registered to a Michael Wilson, age 38. But here's the thing. The vehicle was reported stolen 2 days ago." Sarah frowned. "Any signs of tampering? Hot wiring?" "That's just it." "None. Key was in the ignition, and something else. No fingerprints. Not a single one, not even on the steering wheel or door handles. Someone wiped this thing clean." The implications were clear. This wasn't an opportunistic crime. It was calculated, meticulous. "There's more," Jenkins continued. "We pulled the security footage. At approximately 9:30 p.m. last night, two individuals, one male, one female, exited the taxi and walked away. They kept their faces turned from the cameras, but we're enhancing the footage now." Sarah's mind was already racing ahead. The taxi stolen 2 days ago. The child. The careful cleaning of evidence. This wasn't a simple abandonment case. This was methodical. Professional. "Have we identified the boy?" Parker asked when she relayed Jenkins's findings. "Not yet. The hospital is running his prints through the Children's Identification Program, but I'm not holding my breath. If these people are as careful as they seem, they wouldn't risk using a child who could be easily identified." The doctor approached them, her expression carefully neutral in the way medical professionals mastered when delivering difficult news. "Detective Thompson? I'm Dr. Hernandez. We've completed our initial examination of the child. And? He's suffering from dehydration and mild hypothermia. There are contusions on his wrists and ankles from the restraints, and an older injury on his right arm that appears to be a healed fracture that wasn't properly set." She paused. "There are also injection marks on his arms. We're running toxicology now, but it appears he may have been sedated regularly." Sarah felt her stomach clench. Beside her, Parker muttered something under his breath. "Has he spoken?" Sarah asked. Dr. Hernandez shook her head. "Not a word. But based on his reactions to stimuli and his physical responses, we don't believe he has any developmental issues. This is almost certainly trauma-induced mutism. We'd like to keep him for observation overnight, but he'll need placement after that." "He's not going into the system," Sarah said immediately, her voice hard. "Not standard foster care. He'll be placed with our specialized unit for trafficked minors." As if sensing a potential bureaucratic argument, Parker stepped in. "We'll handle the paperwork, doctor. Can Detective Thompson see him now?" The child was sitting upright in the hospital bed, looking impossibly small against the white sheets. His eyes tracked Sarah as she entered, but his expression remained blank. Max patted softly beside her, and for the first time Sarah noticed a flicker of something. Interest, perhaps, in the boy's gaze as he registered the dog's presence. "Hi there," Sarah said, keeping her voice gentle. "Remember me? I'm Sarah, and this is Max." She approached slowly and sat in the chair beside the bed, allowing Max to move closer to the child. "Would you like to pet him? He's very friendly." The boy didn't respond, but he didn't flinch away either when Max gently rested his head on the edge of the bed. After a moment's hesitation, a small hand reached out, hovering just above the dog's fur. "It's okay," Sarah encouraged. "He likes being petted." Tiny fingers brushed against Max's head, then withdrew quickly, as if testing for a negative reaction. When none came, the hand returned, this time resting more firmly on the dog's fur. It wasn't much, a single gesture from a deeply traumatized child, but as Sarah watched the boy's fingers slowly stroke Max's head, she felt the first spark of the connection that would ultimately break open the largest child trafficking ring on the East Coast. By morning, the investigation into Michael Wilson, the registered owner of the abandoned taxi, had taken a disturbing turn. Sarah sat in the precinct conference room surrounded by case files, coffee cups, and the persistent anxiety that they were already falling behind. The boy, now temporarily named John by hospital staff, remained silent, though his medical tests had revealed more horrors. Trace amounts of sedatives in his system, evidence of malnutrition, and signs of prolonged confinement. "Wilson's been missing for 3 days, Jason Miller, Sarah's partner of 4 years, reported as he pinned a DMV photo of a nondescript middle-aged man to the investigation board. His neighbor reported it when his newspaper started piling up. No family in the area, divorced, lives alone. Worked for Yellow City Cab for 8 years, spotless employment record." Sarah studied the photo. Wilson looked ordinary, the kind of face you'd forget moments after seeing it. What kind of cab driver abandons his source of income and doesn't report it for 2 days? "One who's involved in something illegal," Captain Parker suggested from the doorway. He'd aged overnight, the lines in his face deeper than Sarah had ever seen them. "Or one who can't report it because he's already dead." The captain's words hung in the air like smoke. Sarah felt the familiar tightness in her chest that came with cases involving children. The sense that time was running out for others like John. "We need to search Wilson's apartment," she said, already reaching for her jacket. "Warrants still pending," Jason reminded her. "Judge Harriman says we don't have enough probable cause linking Wilson to the boy. Finding the kid in his stolen taxi isn't enough to justify invasion of privacy." Sarah's fist came down hard on the table. A 4-year-old was bound and drugged in that man's vehicle. What more does Harriman need? "Easy, Thompson," Parker cautioned. "We do this by the book, or whoever did this walks on a technicality." Sarah bit back her frustration. 26 years since Emily disappeared, and the system still moved like molasses when children's lives hung in the balance. "With respect, sir, every hour we wait is another hour that other children might be suffering. Wilson could be a victim, yes, but he could also be a perpetrator who got cold feet and abandoned the boy. Or worse, he could be part of a larger network." Parker sighed, rubbing his temples. "I understand your urgency, believe me, but we need to build this case properly. The forensics team is still processing the taxi. Let's see what they find before we start cutting corners." "And in the meantime?" Sarah challenged. "In the meantime," Parker said firmly, "you focus on the boy. He's our best lead right now if you can get him to talk, to identify anyone." Sarah nodded reluctantly. The captain was right, logically speaking, but logic felt hollow when measured against the haunted emptiness in John's eyes. Back at the hospital, Sarah found John exactly as she'd left him, silent, watchful, with hands that flinched at sudden movements. Max immediately went to the bedside, and Sarah noted how the boy's shoulders relaxed slightly at the dog's presence. "Hi there, John," she said gently, using the temporary name though it felt impersonal. "I brought something for you." She pulled out a small sketch pad and a box of crayons. "Sometimes it's hard to say things, but maybe you could draw for me? Would you like that?" The boy didn't respond verbally, but his eyes focused on the colorful crayons with unmistakable interest. "Here." Sarah placed them on the bed beside him. "You can draw anything you want." For several minutes, John simply stared at the art supplies. Then, with painfully slow movements, he reached for a black crayon and began to draw. Sarah watched, heart beating faster, as crude shapes emerged, a rectangle with wheels, unmistakably a car or taxi. Then smaller figures, stick-like but conveying movement nonetheless. "That's very good," Sarah encouraged. "Is that the taxi you were in?" John continued drawing as if he hadn't heard, adding a larger figure next to the vehicle. Then, in a gesture that sent chills down Sarah's spine, he pressed the black crayon so hard against the paper that it snapped in half, leaving a jagged line across the larger figure's neck. The implications were clear enough that Sarah immediately texted Jason. "Need to check if Wilson has any neck scarring or identifying marks in that area. Possible ID from John." Before Jason could respond, her phone rang. It was Jenkins from the forensics team. "Thompson, we found something in the taxi. Hidden compartment under the back seat. Contained children's clothing, different sizes. And there's more. Traces of previously cleaned blood in the trunk. Not the boy's blood type." Sarah's grip tightened on her phone. "Wilson's? We don't know yet, but there's something else. The GPS history on the taxi's system had been wiped, but our tech guys recovered fragments. This taxi made regular trips to a warehouse district on the outskirts of town. Same location, twice a week for the past 3 months." The pieces were starting to align in a pattern Sarah recognized all too well from her years investigating trafficking cases. The regular schedule, the hidden compartment, the methodical cleaning to remove evidence. "Text me the address," she said, already moving toward the door. "And Jenkins? Keep this quiet for now." No radio chatter about the warehouse. As she hung up, a text from Jason appeared. "Wilson's DMV and employment records show no scars or marks on neck area. Plot thickens." Sarah froze, staring at the message, then back at John's drawing. If the man with the marked neck wasn't Wilson, then who was it? And what had happened to Wilson himself? Her phone rang again. "Captain Parker." "Thompson, where are you?" "Hospital with John. Sir, forensics found." "I know what they found," Parker cut in. "And I know what you're thinking. But I'm ordering you to stand down. We need surveillance on that warehouse before anyone goes near it." "But sir?" "No buts, detective." This has all the markers of a sophisticated operation. If we rush in blind, we risk not only losing evidence but also putting other potential victims in danger. I've already dispatched an unmarked unit to begin surveillance. We'll move when we have a clearer picture. Sarah knew he was right, but every instinct screamed against further delay. How long, sir? 24 hours minimum. We need to establish patterns, identify suspects, build a proper case. Children could be in there right now, Sarah argued, her voice dropping to an urgent whisper as a nurse passed by John's room. And if they are, they'll still be there tomorrow, Parker replied, his tone gentler but no less firm. But if we spook these people by going in half-cocked, they'll scatter and take the children with them. You know how these operations work, Thompson. They have contingency plans, escape routes, multiple locations. The worst part was that Sarah did know. She'd seen trafficking rings dissolve into thin air when approached incorrectly, leaving authorities with empty buildings and no way to track the victims. 24 hours, she conceded finally. But I want to be on that surveillance team. Granted, but Thompson? By the book, I mean it. After hanging up, Sarah returned to John's room to find him still drawing. More figures now, more vehicles. She sat beside him, trying to decipher the crude images while wrestling with her own impatience. The warehouse could be nothing, an innocent delivery location, a coincidence. Or it could be the first thread that, when pulled, would unravel an entire network of child exploitation. Later that evening, as Sarah sat in an unmarked car 2 blocks from the warehouse with Jason, her thoughts kept returning to the drawing. The man with the marked neck. The violence implied in that jagged black line. What if Wilson was a victim too? She said suddenly, breaking the silence. What if he was forced to transport children and then eliminated when he became a liability? Jason adjusted his binoculars, scanning the seemingly abandoned warehouse. It's possible, but why abandon the boy in the airport parking lot? Why not eliminate him too? Maybe they were interrupted. Or maybe... Sarah's voice trailed off as a van with darkened windows pulled up to the warehouse. Movement. They watched as a heavy-set man emerged from the driver's side, glancing furtively around before unlocking the warehouse door. He disappeared inside for approximately 7 minutes before returning to the van, this time accompanied by a slender woman in a dark coat. Taking photos? Sarah asked, tension coiling in her stomach. Got him? Jason confirmed, lowering his camera. Running facial recognition now. Within minutes, his tablet pinged with a result. Richard Davis, 42, multiple priors for assault, and 1 suspected involvement in a prostitution ring. Charges dropped. The woman's not in the system. Sarah committed both faces to memory, her jaw tight. These could be the people who had bound a 4-year-old child and left him to die in a trunk. The people who might have killed Michael Wilson. The people who might, at this very moment, be holding other children captive. For the rest of their surveillance shift, 3 more vehicles arrived and departed, all with darkened windows, all driven by individuals who exhibited the same cautious behavior. None stayed longer than 10 minutes. It's a transfer point, Sarah concluded as their relief arrived at midnight. They're not keeping the children there long term. It's a hub. They bring them in, reassign them, move them out. If you're right, Jason said quietly, this is bigger than anything we've handled before. This isn't some small-time operation with a couple of kids. This is organized, professional. Sarah thought of John's silent terror, of the injection marks on his tiny arms, of Emily's face in the photograph she still carried. Good, she said, and the coldness in her own voice surprised even her. The bigger they are, the harder they fall. By dawn, the surveillance team had documented 17 different vehicles visiting the warehouse. Captain Parker, reviewing the evidence in the station's situation room, finally gave the green light for a raid. Sarah stood at the back of the room during the tactical briefing, Max at her side, both of them vibrating with barely contained energy. SWAT Commander Reeves outlined entry points, contingency plans, and potential hazards, but Sarah's mind was already inside the warehouse, imagining what and who they might find. Remember, Parker emphasized as the briefing concluded, this is primarily a rescue operation. These children have been through hell. Approach with caution, speak softly, move slowly. Detective Thompson has the most experience with trafficking victims. She'll coordinate the care and processing of any minors we find. As the tactical teams geared up, Jason approached Sarah in the locker room. "You okay?" he asked, checking his weapon. Sarah nodded, securing her vest. "I will be when we get those kids out. Just don't get your hopes too high," Jason cautioned. "We don't know for sure there are children in there right now." But Sarah knew. She felt it with the same certainty she'd felt 26 years ago when she'd run home screaming that something terrible had happened to Emily. Adults had doubted her then, too. The raid began at 0600 hours, the window identified by their surveillance as the quietest period at the warehouse. Sarah, positioned with the second entry team at the rear of the building, heard the front door crash open and Commander Reeves's voice boom. "Police! Everyone on the ground, now!" Chaos erupted inside, shouts, the sound of running feet, things crashing to the ground. Sarah's team breached the rear entrance, fanning out through a dingy hallway lined with doors. Max strained at his leash, pulling her toward the third door on the left. The handle was locked, but a quick strike from the tactical team's battering ram splintered the frame. The smell hit her first. Unwashed bodies, human waste, fear. The room was small, windowless, illuminated only by the beams of their flashlights. And there, huddled in corners and crouched on thin mattresses, were children, at least 8 of them, ranging from perhaps 4 to 12 years old. Their eyes, wide with terror, reflected the flashlight beams like those of trapped animals, the same look she'd seen in John's eyes. "Police officers," Sarah called out, unclipping Max's leash and signaling him to stay by the door. She approached slowly, hands visible. "We're here to help you. You're safe now." None of the children moved. Some were shaking, one tiny girl was silently crying, but most just stared with that same vacant expression John had worn. "It's okay," Sarah continued, kneeling to appear less threatening. "No one is going to hurt you anymore. We're going to take you somewhere safe, with clean beds and good food." A small boy, perhaps 7, finally spoke in a whisper so faint Sarah had to lean forward to hear it. "Are they gone, the bad people?" "Yes," Sarah assured him, fighting to keep her voice steady despite the rage and sorrow threatening to overwhelm her. "They can't hurt you now." As the children were carefully escorted from the room, Sarah directed the paramedics, social workers, and victim specialists who had been standing by. Each child needed immediate medical attention, documentation of their condition, and gentle questioning if they were able to speak. The process was one Sarah had overseen dozens of times, but never with so many children at once, never with such clear evidence of systematic abuse. Jason appeared in the doorway, his face grim. "Thompson, you need to see this." He led her to another room, this one set up like an office. Computer equipment lay smashed on the floor, clearly destroyed in the moments before the raid, but one wall was covered with photographs, maps, and notes. Sarah's trained eye immediately recognized it as an operations center for a trafficking network. "This wasn't just a transfer point," Jason said. "This was a command center." Sarah moved closer to the wall, studying the maps. Red pins marked locations across 3 states. Blue pins seemed to indicate routes or transportation hubs, including East Coast International Airport. Photographs showed children, some of whom she just rescued, others she didn't recognize, alongside profiles containing ages, countries of origin, and chillingly, prices. "They were selling them," Sarah whispered, though she'd known it all along, like merchandise. "We arrested 4 individuals on site," Jason reported. "But based on this setup, there are more involved, a lot more." Commander Reeves joined them, his tactical gear dusty from the breach. "The guy in charge wasn't here. The perps we nabbed are low-level, transporters, guards. They're already asking for deals." Sarah's attention was caught by a particular section of the wall, photographs of men in expensive suits, names carefully noted beneath each one. She recognized several: a circuit court judge, 2 state senators, the CEO of a major shipping company. "My God," she breathed. "These are their clients?" Reeves leaned in, his expression darkening. "Or their protection. Look." He pointed to notations beside each name, amounts, dates, services rendered. "These aren't John's. These are the people shielding the operation. Judges dismissing cases, politicians blocking legislation, business owners providing transportation or locations." The implications were staggering. This wasn't just a trafficking ring. It was an enterprise with tentacles reaching into the highest levels of power in their city. "We need to handle this carefully," Reeves warned. These are powerful people. One wrong move and they'll bury the case, and us with it. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from the hospital. John saw the news about the raid on TV. First words spoken, "More kids like me? Consider bringing Max for a visit." Dr. Hernandez. "I need to get to the hospital," Sarah told Jason and Reeves. "John's talking. He might be able to identify some of these people." Back at the hospital, Sarah found John sitting up in bed, clutching a stuffed bear that one of the nurses had given him. When Max bounded into the room, his tail wagging, the boy's face transformed. Not quite a smile, but the closest thing to it Sarah had seen. "Hi, John," she said gently. "I hear you've been talking a little bit." The boy nodded, still petting Max. "You found the others?" he said in a voice raspy from disuse. "Yes, we did. They're safe now, just like you." John was quiet for a long moment, his hand buried in Max's fur. Then, in a small voice, "There are more. Not there. Other places." Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, careful not to crowd him. "Can you tell me about these other places, John? Or about the people who took you?" The boy's face clouded, fear returning to his eyes. But then he looked at Max, took a deep breath, and spoke. "The man with the black neck. He's the one who hurt Michael." Sarah's heart quickened. "Michael? Do you mean the taxi driver, Michael Wilson?" John nodded. "Michael was nice. He gave me cookies sometimes. But then the man with the black neck found out." "What happened then, John?" The boy's eyes filled with tears. "They hurt Michael. Bad. He was screaming and then he wasn't. And then they put me in the trunk." His voice broke. "I heard them say the airport was safe, that no one would look there." Sarah fought to keep her expression neutral despite the horror forming a knot in her stomach. "John, would you recognize the man with the black neck if you saw him again? Or could you describe him?" John nodded solemnly. "He has a big mark here," he said, drawing a finger across his throat in the same pattern he'd drawn on the sketch. "Like someone tried to cut him, and he wears fancy suits." "Does he have a name? Did you ever hear anyone call him something?" John shook his head, then paused. "Wait. They called him Rich sometimes, or Richard." Sarah's blood ran cold. Richard Davis, the heavyset man they'd photographed at the warehouse. He was still at large, they hadn't caught him in the raid. "John, you're being incredibly brave," she said. "You're helping us find the bad people who did this. I'm going to show you some pictures, okay? Just tell me if you recognize anyone." She took out her tablet and pulled up the surveillance photos they'd taken, starting with the woman they hadn't identified. John shook his head. Then she showed him Richard Davis. The reaction was immediate and violent. John recoiled, a small cry escaping his lips. Max, sensing his distress, pressed closer to the boy, offering comfort. "That's him," John whispered. "That's the man with the black neck." Sarah quickly switched off the tablet. "You don't have to look at him anymore. You're safe from him now." But even as she said the words, she wasn't sure they were true. Davis was still out there, and now they had evidence connecting him directly to at least one kidnapping and a potential murder. He'd be desperate, dangerous. As Sarah left the hospital an hour later, her phone rang. It was Captain Parker. "Thompson, where are you?" "Just leaving the hospital." John ID'd Richard Davis as the man who likely killed Michael Wilson and put him in the trunk. "We need to get back to the station." "Now," Parker interrupted, his voice tense. "The chief wants to talk to us." "About the case?" "About the fact that we just implicated Judge Martin Harriman, Senator William Foster, and 6 other high-profile individuals in a child trafficking ring. The phones haven't stopped ringing since we logged those photos into evidence." Sarah felt a chill. The same Judge Harriman who had delayed their warrant for Wilson's apartment. When she arrived at the precinct, the tension was palpable. Officers spoke in hushed tones, conversations stopping when she walked by. In the conference room, she found Parker, Jason, Reeves, and Police Chief Donovan in what appeared to be a heated discussion. "Ah, Detective Thompson," Chief Donovan said, his tone clipped. "Perhaps you can explain why your team proceeded with a high-profile raid without proper authorization from my office." "With respect, sir, we had authorization," Sarah replied, looking to Parker for support. Captain Parker approved the operation based on substantial evidence of child endangerment. "Evidence which now appears to be compromised," Donovan countered. "Judge Harriman has already filed a formal complaint alleging evidence tampering and defamation." "Tampering?" Sarah repeated incredulously. We photographed what was on that wall exactly as we found it. And yet now those photographs are being questioned because proper chain of custody protocols may not have been followed during the chaos of the raid, Donovan continued. Furthermore, the connection between these photographs on a wall and actual criminal activity is tenuous at best. These could be business associates, campaign donors. These were children, Sarah cut in, her voice rising despite her efforts to remain calm. 8 children locked in a room without windows, malnourished, some showing signs of physical and sexual abuse. We have one victim who has positively identified Richard Davis, who remains at large, by the way, as the man who likely murdered Michael Wilson. There is nothing tenuous about this evidence. Chief Donovan's expression hardened. Detective, I understand your passion for these cases, but passion doesn't excuse recklessness. You've made accusations against some of the most powerful men in this state based on pictures pinned to a wall and the word of a traumatized 4-year-old. Sir, Commander Reeves interjected, we also recovered partial financial records before the computers were destroyed. They show payments from several of the individuals in those photos to offshore accounts linked to Davis. The chief's jaw tightened. The investigation will continue, but under different leadership. Detective Thompson, you're too emotionally involved. I'm assigning the case to Lieutenant Morrison from Major Crimes. Morrison? Sarah couldn't hide her disbelief. He has no experience with trafficking cases. But he does have experience handling politically sensitive investigations, Donovan replied coolly. You'll turn over all your files and notes to him by end of day. After the chief left, Sarah turned to Parker, betrayal burning in her chest. You're letting this happen? After what we found? Parker looked older than she'd ever seen him, the weight of 30 years on the force evident in the slump of his shoulders. It's not that simple, Thompson. The department is under immense pressure. These are powerful people with powerful friends. So we just back down? Let them continue trafficking children because they have connections? Her voice cracked with emotion. What about John? What about the other children still out there? We don't back down, Parker said firmly. We just change tactics. Morrison will front the investigation publicly, but you'll continue working the case, unofficially. Sir, Jason spoke up, that's a career-ending move if it goes sideways. Then we make damn sure it doesn't, Parker replied. Look, Donovan's right about one thing. We need to be careful with how we proceed. These people have resources, connections. They'll use every legal maneuver to discredit our evidence and our witnesses. While Richard Davis gets further away by the minute, Sarah pointed out bitterly. We've got alerts out for Davis across 3 states, Parker assured her. But in the meantime, we need to build an airtight case against the rest of the network. That means more evidence, more witnesses. One traumatized boy and some photographs won't be enough to take down men like Harriman and Foster. Sarah knew he was right, logically speaking. But logic felt hollow against the image of those children huddled in that windowless room, against John's terror when he saw Davis's picture. That night, alone in her apartment with Max, Sarah spread the case files across her living room floor, copies she'd made before surrendering the originals to Morrison. Something about the network's structure nagged at her. The children they'd rescued came from different backgrounds, different states, even different countries. How was the network acquiring them? And why had only 8 children been at the warehouse when their surveillance suggested much more activity? The answer hit her at 2 a.m. The warehouse wasn't the only location. It was just one node in a larger network. Somewhere out there were other warehouses, other children, other Richard Davises moving them around like pieces on a chessboard. And she was now officially off the case, her hands tied by politics and power. Sarah's phone rang, startling her. It was Jason. Thompson, you need to turn on the news. Now. She fumbled for the remote, switching on her rarely used television. The screen filled with flashing police lights and a reporter standing outside a familiar building, Judge Martin Harriman's downtown residence. Sources confirm that Judge Harriman was found dead in his home approximately 1 hour ago. While police have not officially ruled on the cause of death, anonymous sources within the department suggest it may have been suicide. This comes just hours after Harriman was implicated in a controversial police investigation into child trafficking. Sarah felt a cold sense of dread wash over her. This wasn't suicide. This was cleanup, the network silencing a liability. "They're covering their tracks," she said into the phone. "That's not all," Jason replied grimly. "The evidence from the warehouse, the photographs, the financial records, they're gone, signed out of evidence by Lieutenant Morrison, and now nowhere to be found." The implications were clear. The corruption went deeper than they'd imagined, possibly reaching into their own department. Sarah was no longer just isolated within her team. She was potentially surrounded by people working against her, against the children she'd sworn to protect. "What do we do now?" Jason asked, the question hanging between them like a physical thing. Sarah looked down at Max, then at Emily's photograph on her coffee table. "We go rogue," she said finally, "and we bring the whole damn network down." For the next 72 hours, Sarah operated in the shadows of her own department. She and Jason established a makeshift command center in her apartment, away from potentially compromised eyes at the precinct. Captain Parker, walking a delicate line between official procedure and his own moral compass, fed them information through secure channels while maintaining plausible deniability with the brass. "This is everything we have on Richard Davis," Jason said, pinning surveillance photos to a corkboard Sarah had mounted on her living room wall. "Former military, dishonorable discharge for conduct unbecoming in 2010, suspected ties to several trafficking operations across state lines, but never convicted. The scar on his neck supposedly came from a prison fight during his brief incarceration for assault in 2012. Sarah studied the man's cold eyes, the distinctive scar running across his throat like a second mouth. "He's just middle management. There's someone above him, someone with enough influence to make evidence disappear and enough ruthlessness to eliminate a sitting judge." Their breakthrough came from an unexpected source. The hospital called to inform Sarah that John had formed an attachment to another child rescued from the warehouse, a 6-year-old girl named Lily, who'd been placed in the same specialized care facility as John after her medical evaluation. Unlike John, Lily hadn't spoken at all, but she'd begun communicating through drawings, detailed, disturbing images that revealed a level of observation surprising in a child so young. "She's drawn the same man multiple times," the child psychologist explained, showing Sarah a series of crayon sketches. "We believe he may be the leader of the operation." The figure in Lily's drawings was tall, elegant, with precisely rendered features that seemed almost aristocratic. He wore what appeared to be expensive suits, and in each drawing he was giving orders to other adults while children huddled in the background. "Does John recognize him?" Sarah asked. "He became very agitated when he saw the drawings," the psychologist confirmed. "He said that's the man in charge and that everyone is afraid of him, even the man with the black neck." Sarah studied the drawings more carefully. In one, the elegant man stood near what appeared to be water, with shapes that might be shipping containers in the background. In another, he was inside what looked like a boat or ship's cabin. "John mentioned something about the docks when I first interviewed him," Sarah recalled. "He said he remembered the smell of the ocean and the sound of foghorns before he was transferred to the warehouse." That night, as rain pelted against her apartment windows, Sarah and Jason compiled everything they knew about shipping and maritime operations connected to the trafficking network. The CEO of Transatlantic Shipping, Robert Langford, had been among the influential men photographed on the warehouse wall. His company controlled a significant portion of the harbor operations at Port Liberty, just 15 miles from the city center. "Transatlantic has a shipment arriving from Eastern Europe tomorrow night," Jason reported, looking up from his laptop. The manifest lists industrial equipment, but the shipping container specifications match those commonly used for human trafficking: modified ventilation, concealed access panels. "It's them," Sarah said with certainty. "They're bringing in more children." "How do you want to play this?" Jason asked, his expression grave. "We're officially off the case. If we move on this without authorization—" "I know the risks," Sarah cut in. "But I also know what happens to those children if that shipment makes it to the warehouse, Or worse, if they've already set up a new location since we raided the last one. They debated their options deep into the night. Going through official channels seemed impossible given the corruption they'd already encountered. Going alone would be suicide against an operation of this magnitude. Finally, Sarah made a call to the one person she trusted implicitly. "Parker, it's me. We've got a lead on Davis and potentially the whole operation. But we need help. People we can trust." The captain was silent for a long moment. "You understand what you're asking? If this goes wrong?" "I know," Sarah said quietly, "but I'm asking anyway." 24 hours later, as darkness settled over Port Liberty, a small team of carefully selected officers, those Parker would stake his career and life on being clean, positioned themselves around Dock 27, where the transatlantic vessel Carpathian Star was scheduled to unload. Sarah, Jason, and Max waited in an unmarked van, surveillance equipment trained on the ship as cranes began offloading containers onto the dock. "Movement at the south entrance," Jason reported, focusing his binoculars. "Black SUV, windows tinted. Same model we observed at the warehouse." Sarah's pulse quickened as she recognized the heavy figure that emerged from the passenger side. Davis. The man with the black neck stood on the dock, scanning his surroundings with predatory alertness before speaking into a radio. Minutes later, a forklift separated a specific container from the others, moving it toward a waiting truck rather than the standard processing area. "That's the one," Sarah said, voice tight with tension. "They're circumventing customs inspection." She radioed the team. "All units, target identified. Container being loaded onto white semi-truck west side of Dock 27. Hold positions until the exchange is complete. We need to identify all players." As they watched, a second vehicle arrived, a sleek black Mercedes with diplomatic plates. The driver remained inside, but the back door opened to reveal a tall, slender man in an immaculate suit. Even from a distance, Sarah recognized him from Lily's drawings. The elegant bearing, the authoritative stance. This was the man in charge. "That's James Carter." Parker's voice came through her earpiece, tight with surprise. "European trade attaché. He has diplomatic immunity." The pieces clicked together in Sarah's mind. Diplomatic immunity meant minimal customs scrutiny. International connections provided access to vulnerable children in multiple countries. Wealth and status offered both resources and the perfect cover. Carter and Davis conversed briefly, their body language suggesting a hierarchical relationship, Davis deferential, Carter imperious. After examining documentation from a dock worker, Carter nodded and returned to his vehicle, while Davis supervised the loading of the container onto the truck. "We move now," Sarah decided, "before they separate. Primary target is the container and the truck. Secondary targets are Davis and Carter. Remember, there may be children inside. Approach with caution once the area is secured." She gave the signal, and their small force converged on the dock from multiple directions, vehicles blocking potential escape routes, tech officers moving with the precision that came from years of training. "Police, everybody down, hands where we can see them." The operation exploded into chaos. Dock workers dropped to the ground, but Davis's security team reached for weapons. Gunfire erupted, the sharp crack of pistols echoing across the water as Sarah and Jason raced toward the container, using vehicles for cover. Max strained at his leash, focused on the truck where the driver was attempting to flee. Sarah released him with a command, and the German Shepherd streaked across the open space, leaping through the half-open driver's window and taking down the man attempting to start the engine. Sarah reached the back of the container, Jason covering her as she worked the locks. When the heavy doors swung open, the familiar smell of fear and human suffering washed over her. Inside, huddled in the darkness, were at least 20 children, some as young as 3, none older than 12, all showing signs of neglect and trauma. "Police officers," Sarah called out, holstering her weapon to appear less threatening. "You're safe now? We're here to help you." The children didn't move, their expressions vacant or terrified, until a small voice spoke from the back in accented English. "Are you taking us to the bad place?" Sarah's throat tightened. "No, sweetheart. We're taking you somewhere safe. The bad people can't hurt you anymore." As specialized units arrived to care for the children, the firefight on the dock intensified. Davis had taken cover behind shipping equipment, his security team forming a perimeter around him. Carter's Mercedes had attempted to flee but was blocked by police vehicles. The diplomatic car now riddled with bullet holes, though its occupants remained inside, protected by its armored exterior. Sarah heard Jason cry out in pain as a bullet grazed his arm. She pulled him behind a concrete barrier, checking the wound. Superficial, she confirmed, relief washing through her. Stay down. Davis is getting away, Jason warned through gritted teeth, nodding toward the north end of the dock where the man with the black neck was making a break for a small speedboat moored at the pier's edge. Sarah signaled to Parker across the dock. Cover me. Then, with Max at her side, she sprinted after Davis, dodging gunfire and leaping over obstacles. The man with the black neck saw her coming, turned, and fired twice in her direction. One bullet whizzed past her ear, the other struck a metal container with a resonant clang. Max, take him, Sarah commanded, and the dog surged forward with single-minded purpose, a blur of muscle and fur, closing the distance to Davis in seconds. The German shepherd launched himself at the trafficking lieutenant, latching onto his gun arm with powerful jaws. Davis screamed, the weapon clattering to the ground as man and dog tumbled onto the wooden planks of the pier. Sarah reached them moments later, weapon trained on Davis's head as Max maintained his grip. It's over, Davis. You're done. The man with the black neck glared up at her, blood seeping from the puncture wounds in his arm. You have no idea what you've done, he spat. They'll kill me in prison. Confess, testify against Carter and the others, and we'll protect you, Sarah countered, even as she wondered if any protection would be sufficient against a network this powerful. Back at the main dock, the firefight had concluded. 3 of Davis's men were down. 2 wounded, 1 dead. The rest had surrendered. Carter remained in his Mercedes, the diplomatic standoff presenting a legal nightmare that would continue for hours. As Sarah secured Davis in a patrol car, Captain Parker approached, his expression a mix of triumph and concern. We got the children out, we got Davis, and we've identified Carter as the ringleader. But this isn't over, Thompson. Carter's already on the phone with the State Department claiming diplomatic immunity and filing formal protests. The evidence in that container and on that truck will override diplomatic concerns, Sarah insisted. 20 children, Parker. Even the State Department can't ignore that. Let's hope you're right, the captain replied grimly, because we just started an international incident with a very well-connected individual. The blowback will be severe. Sarah turned to watch as paramedics and child welfare specialists tended to the rescued children, wrapping them in blankets, checking their vital signs, speaking in gentle tones. Worth it, she said simply. The next 12 hours unfolded in a blur of activity. The children, who came from 6 different countries according to preliminary identification efforts, were transported to specialized medical facilities. Davis, after being treated for the bite wounds inflicted by Max, was booked on multiple charges, including kidnapping, trafficking, and conspiracy to commit murder. Carter presented the most complex challenge. After a tense standoff, the State Department reluctantly agreed to waive diplomatic immunity given the severity and nature of the allegations, but the legal battle promised to be protracted and difficult. As dawn broke over the city, Sarah sat in an interrogation room across from Richard Davis, the man with the black neck. He'd been processed, photographed, his distinctive scar documented in the booking images that would eventually be shown to John for formal identification. I want a deal, Davis said without preamble. That depends on what you're offering, Sarah replied coolly. Names, locations, dates, everything about Carter's operation, including who he was selling the kids to. Davis leaned forward, his eyes calculating. But I want witness protection, the highest level. New identity, relocation, the works. You're a child trafficker implicated in at least 1 murder, Sarah reminded him. You're not exactly in a position to make demands. I'm your only link to the rest of the network, Davis countered. Carter won't talk. He has too many powerful friends, but I know everything. Every judge, every politician, every businessman who participated. I know where the money went, where the children came from, how many are still out there in other locations. Sarah's heart stuttered at his last words. Other locations? There are more children currently being held? Davis nodded slowly, a thin smile spreading across his face as he recognized his leverage. At least 30 more in 3 different facilities. But I'll only reveal the locations once my deal is in writing. Sarah fought to control her expression, to not betray the urgency that now consumed her. Every hour those children remained in captivity was another hour of unimaginable suffering. I'll talk to the DA, she said, standing to leave. But understand this, if any of those children are harmed while you play games for a better deal, I'll personally make sure you never see daylight again. Outside the interrogation room, she found Captain Parker waiting, his face drawn with exhaustion, but his eyes alert. He says there are more children, Sarah reported, her voice tight. 30 more, in locations he won't disclose without a deal. Parker ran a hand over his face. I'll call the district attorney. But Thompson, we need to move carefully here. Davis could be lying to improve his position. Or he could be telling the truth, and 30 children are counting on us to find them, Sarah countered. We need to push the DA for an expedited agreement. As they debated next steps, Jason approached from the end of the hallway, his wounded arm now properly bandaged and in a sling. You both need to see this, he said urgently. The forensics team found something in Carter's Mercedes, a laptop with encrypted files. The tech unit just cracked them open. He led them to a conference room where a technician was projecting images onto a screen. Sarah gasped as she recognized what she was seeing. Detailed records of every child that had passed through the trafficking network over the past 5 years. Names, ages, countries of origin, purchase prices, and most disturbingly, final sale destinations. There are hundreds, the technician said quietly, going back years. And there, highlighted on the screen, were 3 addresses, warehouses similar to the one they'd already raided, each currently housing children awaiting transport or sale. Sarah exchanged looks with Parker. They had the evidence they needed. They had the locations. Now they faced the most dangerous phase of all, hitting 3 heavily guarded facilities simultaneously, while the network was on high alert after Carter's arrest. Assemble tactical teams, Parker ordered. We move on all 3 locations at dawn. As the command center erupted into activity, Sarah stood still for a moment, absorbing the magnitude of what they'd uncovered and what still lay ahead. This wasn't just a case anymore. It was a war against predators who saw children as commodities, against corruption that reached the highest levels of power, against the darkest aspects of human nature. And despite the victories of the night, she knew the hardest battles were yet to come. The coordinated raids on the 3 warehouses were scheduled for 5 a.m., the moment when human alertness is at its lowest ebb, when guards would be drowsy and reaction times slowed by the body's natural rhythms. Sarah led the team targeting the facility closest to the port, while Jason coordinated the second location across town. Captain Parker, despite Sarah's objections that he should oversee operations from the command center, insisted on personally leading the raid on the 3rd warehouse, a decaying industrial building in the old manufacturing district. Some things you don't delegate, Thompson, he'd told her, checking his weapon with the methodical precision of a man who'd spent 40 years in law enforcement. These children deserve to see that the people at the top care enough to show up for them. Sarah had nodded, recognizing in Parker's eyes the same fire that burned in her own, the determination that had sustained him through decades of police work, through the evolution of crime and the constant battle against institutional corruption. At 62, William Parker should have been contemplating retirement, perhaps a quiet life of fishing at his cabin upstate. Instead, he was strapping on tactical gear, preparing to breach a building potentially filled with armed traffickers. Just be careful, sir, she'd said, unable to shake a creeping sense of dread. These people are cornered now. They know we're dismantling their network. Parker had smiled, a tired smile that nonetheless carried genuine warmth. I've been doing this since before you were in pigtails, Thompson. One last big case before I turn in my badge. Make it count, right? Those were the last words he spoke to her. Sarah's team successfully breached their target at precisely 5 a.m. The operation went textbook smooth. 2 guards subdued without casualties, 11 children rescued, most sleeping when the team entered. The children, ranging from 5 to 10 years old, were primarily from Eastern European and Central American countries. Their physical conditions varied, but all showed signs of neglect and psychological trauma. As Sarah supervised the children's transfer to waiting medical personnel, her radio crackled with updates from the second warehouse. Jason's team had encountered stiffer resistance, gunfire exchanged, 2 officers wounded, but ultimately successful. 8 more children rescued, 3 traffickers in custody. But the radio remained ominously silent regarding the third location. Sarah tried raising Parker on the tactical frequency. Nothing. She contacted the command center. Any word from Captain Parker's team at Warehouse 3? Negative, Detective. They went radio silent approximately 7 minutes after breach. SWAT Commander Rogers reported heavy resistance, then communications cut out. A cold weight settled in Sarah's stomach. I'm heading there now. Have medical teams standing by. The scene that greeted Sarah at the third warehouse would haunt her dreams for years to come. Police vehicles surrounded the building, lights flashing in the pre-dawn darkness. Paramedics rushed in and out, some escorting dazed children, others pushing gurneys bearing wounded officers. The sharp smell of gunpowder hung in the air, mingling with the metallic scent of blood. Sarah spotted Commander Rogers seated on the bumper of an ambulance, a bandage wrapped around his upper arm, his face ashen. "Where's Captain Parker?" she demanded. Rogers looked up, his eyes hollow with shock. "Inside, East Corridor. We couldn't reach him in time." Sarah ran, Max keeping pace beside her, pushing past officers and medical personnel, ignoring shouts to wait for clearance. The interior of the warehouse was a maze of narrow hallways and small rooms, cells, essentially, where children had been kept. The floor was slick in places with blood, shell casings scattered like macabre confetti. She found Parker in a corridor near what appeared to be a makeshift office. He lay on his back, tactical vest soaked crimson despite its protective plates. 3 SWAT officers knelt around him, one performing chest compressions with mechanical precision, while another held pressure bandages against multiple wounds. "Captain," Sarah's voice broke as she dropped to her knees beside him. Parker's eyes fluttered open, finding her face. His lips moved, but no sound emerged. One of the SWAT officers, Johnson, she vaguely registered, shook his head minutely. The gesture's meaning was unmistakable. "Stay with me," Sarah pleaded, grasping Parker's hand. "Medics are coming. You're going to be fine." Parker managed the ghost of a smile. His lips formed words she could barely make out. "Get them all." Then his eyes fixed on something only he could see. His hand went slack in hers, and Captain William Parker, her mentor, her surrogate father, the man who had believed in her when no one else did, was gone. The next hours passed in a blur of procedural necessities. The official narrative emerged in fragments. Parker's team had walked into an ambush. Unlike the other warehouses, this one had been staffed with professional mercenaries, former military by the looks of their tactics and weaponry. They had been prepared to fight rather than surrender, perhaps under orders to eliminate evidence, including the children if discovered. Parker had encountered the leader of the security team while searching for hidden children. According to surviving officers, the captain had engaged in a firefight that allowed several children to escape down a corridor to safety, but at the cost of exposing himself to fire from multiple angles. By mid-morning, the full toll became clear. Captain Parker dead, 4 officers wounded, 3 children killed in the crossfire, though 9 others rescued alive. The mercenary leader had also been killed, along with 2 of his men. The rest were in custody, though none were talking. Sarah sat alone in Parker's office that afternoon, Max lying at her feet. The captain's reading glasses still sat on his desk, next to a half-finished cup of coffee and the framed photo of his late wife. Decades of service, commendations, and sacrifice, reduced to personal effects that would soon be boxed up and given to distant relatives. Parker had no children of his own, had instead poured his paternal instincts into mentoring officers like Sarah. "He died saving those kids," Jason said from the doorway, his wounded arm still in a sling. "That's how he would have wanted to go." Sarah didn't respond. A cold, hollow feeling had replaced the initial shock and grief, a void rapidly filling with something darker. She thought of Parker's last words. Get them all. Not save the children or close the case, but get them all. It sounded like permission, or perhaps a command, to do whatever necessary to dismantle the network completely, to punish those responsible. The funeral 3 days later was attended by hundreds of officers from across the state. The police commissioner delivered a solemn eulogy, and Parker's casket was draped with the flag he had served under for so many years. Sarah stood stone-faced throughout, unable to shed the tears that seemed locked inside her chest, behind a wall of mounting rage. That night, alone in her apartment, the dam finally broke. She hurled a glass against the wall, then another, then swept everything from her kitchen counter in a violent explosion of grief and fury. Max watched from a distance, uncharacteristically subdued, as though understanding that his human was processing emotions beyond his canine comprehension. When Sarah finally collapsed onto her couch, emotionally spent, Max approached cautiously, resting his head on her lap. The simple, unconditional gesture of comfort broke through her anger, and at last, the tears came. Not in the dignified trickle that might befit a hardened detective, but in heaving sobs that bent her double. He was supposed to retire, she told Max, fingers buried in the dog's fur. He was supposed to fish and read those history books he loved and grow old telling police stories that got more exaggerated every year. In the days that followed, Sarah's colleagues noticed a change in her. The focused, by-the-book detective was replaced by someone harder, colder, driven by something that went beyond justice. She interrogated the captured mercenaries with an intensity that made even seasoned officers uncomfortable. When one smugly invoked his right to an attorney, witnesses reported that Sarah leaned close and whispered something that drained the color from the man's face. Jason found her late one evening in the evidence room, reviewing footage from the warehouse surveillance cameras recovered after the raid. She'd been there for hours, watching the same clips repeatedly, particularly the grainy images showing the lead mercenary, the man who had killed Parker. "Sarah," Jason said gently, using her first name rather than her surname, a rarity in their professional relationship. "You need to rest. This isn't healthy." "I'm fine," she replied without looking up. "No, you're not. None of us are. But Parker wouldn't want this, you driving yourself into the ground, becoming something you're not." Sarah finally turned to face him, her eyes hollow. "What if this is exactly what I am? What if all the procedure and protocol was just restraint? Parker was the one who believed in the system, in doing things the right way, and look where it got him." "It got him a lifetime of making a difference," Jason countered. "Of saving lives, including those 9 kids at the warehouse. If you throw away everything he taught you now, what was the point?" The words struck a chord, but Sarah had already traveled too far down a darker path. That night, she did something she had never done in her career. She made a copy of the warehouse security footage, specifically the clear shots of the mercenary leader's face, and took it home. For 3 days, Sarah didn't return to the precinct. She didn't answer calls from Jason or other colleagues. She barely slept, barely ate. Her apartment walls became covered with photographs, notes, connections. A spider's web centered on the mercenary leader and by extension his employer, James Carter, who remained in federal custody but had yet to be formally charged due to ongoing diplomatic complications. On the 3rd night, Sarah cleaned her service weapon with mechanical precision, checked her tactical gear, and prepared to do something unthinkable, to seek vengeance rather than justice, to hunt down the remaining members of Carter's network without backup, without authorization, without badges or warrants or Miranda rights. She was halfway to her door, gear packed, when Max planted himself in her path, ears flat against his head, a low whine emanating from his throat. "Move, Max," she ordered. The German shepherd didn't budge. Instead, he moved to her desk where, in her single-minded fury, she had knocked aside the framed photograph taken at her police academy graduation. Parker standing beside her, his hand on her shoulder, both of them smiling with genuine pride. Max nudged the fallen frame with his nose, then looked up at Sarah with an intelligence that seemed almost human. Something broke inside her then. Not the fragile dam holding back her grief, but the harder shell of vengeance that had formed around it. She sank to her knees, arms wrapping around Max, as fresh tears came. "What am I doing?" she whispered into his fur. "This isn't me. This isn't what he taught me." Max pressed closer, offering the simple comfort of his presence, his steady heartbeat against hers. In that moment, Sarah realized that while her grief might never fully heal, allowing it to transform her into something Parker would have despised would be the true betrayal of his memory. She put away her gear, unpacked her weapon, and for the first time since the funeral, slept through the night with Max curled protectively at her feet. In the morning, she returned to the precinct, ready to continue the fight, not as an avenger, but as the detective William Parker had trained her to be. Sarah's return to the precinct was met with a mixture of relief and wariness. Her colleagues respected her grief, but were uncertain how to approach the woman who had lost not just a captain, but a father figure. The case against James Carter and his trafficking network continued to build, with evidence recovered from the 3 warehouses providing crucial links to financial transactions, transport routes, and client lists. Though the diplomatic hurdles remained substantial, the sheer volume of evidence made it increasingly difficult for Carter's high-powered attorneys to construct a plausible defense. 2 weeks after Captain Parker's funeral, Sarah sat across from Richard Davis in an interview room at the Federal Detention Center where he was being held pending trial. Davis had finally secured the plea deal he wanted in exchange for his complete cooperation. With a federal marshal present and the conversation being recorded, Davis began to reveal the inner workings of Carter's operation: names, dates, locations, financial arrangements. But it was when the conversation turned to Michael Wilson, the taxi driver whose vehicle had contained young John, that Sarah received her first significant shock. Wilson wasn't just some random cab driver, Davis said, leaning forward. He was a cop. Sarah stared at him, certain she had misheard. "What did you say?" An undercover cop had been for months. Davis's mouth twisted into a smirk. He thought he was so clever, working his way into the organization as a driver. "We use taxis to transport the merchandise sometimes. Less suspicious than vans, you know?" But Wilson got sloppy, started asking too many questions, poking around in areas that weren't his concern. "How did you discover he was undercover?" Sarah asked, struggling to maintain her professional composure despite the revelation. "One of our people in the department flagged him. We've got eyes everywhere, detective." Davis tapped his temple. "Anyway, Carter ordered me to handle the situation. I took care of Wilson, but the kid was a problem. We couldn't just eliminate him. Too valuable. But we couldn't risk taking him to one of the regular facilities either, in case Wilson had already reported its location." "So you left him in the taxi trunk at the airport," Sarah finished, the pieces falling into place. "A temporary holding solution until you could figure out where to move him." Davis nodded. "The plan was to retrieve him the next night, but your dog complicated things." Sarah's mind was racing. If Wilson had been undercover, there would be records, a handler, case files, but she had found nothing in the system about an authorized operation. Either Davis was lying or... "This undercover operation," she said carefully, "was it officially sanctioned?" Davis laughed, an ugly sound in the sterile room. "What do you think? Wilson was a true believer, thought he could bring down the whole network on his own when his superiors wouldn't listen. Turns out he was right about the network, wrong about his chances of surviving it." Back at the precinct, Sarah immediately requested access to all personnel files on Michael Wilson. The records confirmed his employment as a patrol officer 3 years prior, followed by an abrupt resignation cited as personal reasons. There was no indication of any undercover work, authorized or otherwise. She took her findings to Lieutenant Harrison, who had temporarily assumed Parker's duties. "I need to know if Captain Parker was running Wilson off the books," she said without preamble. "An unauthorized undercover operation targeting Carter's network." Harrison's expression remained carefully neutral. "That would be highly irregular, detective, and potentially career-ending for everyone involved if discovered." "With respect, sir, a man is dead, a good cop who was trying to do the right thing. I need to know if Parker knew about this." Harrison was silent for a long moment, then sighed heavily. "Wait here." He returned 10 minutes later with a sealed envelope, which he placed on the desk between them. This was in Parker's personal safe. He left instructions that it should be opened in the event of his death, but only if certain questions were asked. Your question qualified. With trembling fingers, Sarah opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter in Parker's distinctive scrawl, along with a USB drive. "Sarah," the letter began, "if you're reading this, two things have happened. I'm gone, and you've discovered Michael Wilson's true role. Yes, I was running him unofficially. After our initial reports about Carter's operation were dismissed by the brass as insufficient evidence, Wilson volunteered to go in without sanction. I tried to talk him out of it, but the kid was stubborn. Reminded me of you, actually. The USB contains his reports, everything he discovered before communication was cut off. I kept this from you because I knew you'd insist on proper protocols, on bringing in the department officially. But we both suspected corruption within our ranks, and I couldn't risk Wilson's life by widening the circle of knowledge. I'm sorry for the secrecy. Use this information wisely and watch your back. Not everyone wearing a badge is on the right side of this fight. Parker." Sarah plugged the USB drive into her computer with Harrison looking on. It contained months of detailed reports from Wilson, locations, transactions, names of children, descriptions of Carter's security team. The final entry was dated 2 days before Wilson's disappearance, noting that he believed he had been compromised and feared for his safety. "My God," Harrison breathed, reading over her shoulder. "This is enough to bury Carter and half the power players in the city." Sarah nodded, but her attention had caught on a specific line in Wilson's final report. Concerns about potential leak within investigation team. Exercise extreme caution in all communications. Wilson had suspected someone close to the investigation, possibly someone she worked with daily, of feeding information to Carter's organization. The next morning, Sarah arrived at the precinct earlier than usual, her mind still processing Wilson's reports and their implications. The squad room was nearly empty, with only a few officers from the night shift finishing their paperwork. She was reviewing case files at her desk when Jason arrived, coffee in hand, his injured arm now out of the sling but still moving stiffly. "You're here early," he commented, placing a cup on her desk. "Brought you the good stuff from Marino's, not that break room sludge." "Thanks," Sarah said, studying her partner's face. 4 years working side by side, trusting him with her life countless times. The idea that Jason could be the leak Wilson had warned about seemed impossible. Yet doubt, once planted, was difficult to uproot. "Any progress with Davis?" Jason asked, settling at his own desk. Sarah hesitated, then made a split-second decision. "Actually, yes. He revealed something interesting about the warehouse on Kepler Street. Apparently, there's a hidden room we missed, containing financial records that would tie Carter directly to Senator Foster." It was a lie. There had been no such revelation from Davis. No hidden room, no specific connection to Foster beyond what they already knew. If Jason was the leak, this false information would make its way to Carter's associates. "That's huge," Jason said, his expression brightening. "When are we checking it out?" "Harrison wants to keep it quiet for now," Sarah replied casually. "Probably send a small team tomorrow morning." Throughout the day, Sarah watched Jason carefully, looking for any sign that he was passing information. He made several phone calls, all apparently work-related. He left for lunch alone, returning 45 minutes later with a sandwich wrapper from the deli across the street. Nothing suspicious, nothing out of routine. Sarah was beginning to think she had misjudged the situation when, around 4 p.m., Jason received a text that made him visibly tense. He read it, then quickly pocketed his phone. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Yeah, fine," he replied, not meeting her eyes. "Just some personal stuff. Listen, I need to take off a bit early today. Can you cover for me with Harrison?" "Sure," Sarah said, keeping her tone neutral. "Everything all right at home?" Yeah, just plumbing issue. Gotta meet the repairman." The lie was transparent, awkward from a man who was typically a skilled conversationalist. As soon as Jason left, Sarah nodded to Officer Rivera, who had been briefed on her suspicions earlier that day. Rivera immediately followed Jason, maintaining a discreet distance. 30 minutes later, Rivera called. "He's at Carter's attorney's office, detective. Went straight there, no stops." Sarah's heart sank. The confirmation of her partner's betrayal felt like a physical blow. "Stay on him, Rivera. I'm on my way." Instead of confronting Jason immediately, Sarah decided to follow him after he left the attorney's office. He drove to a modest residential neighborhood across town, parking outside a small, well-maintained house. Sarah and Rivera watched from an unmarked car as Jason knocked on the door and was admitted by a woman in her 30s, presumably his ex-wife Melissa, whom he rarely discussed. "This doesn't make sense," Sarah murmured. "Why go from Carter's attorney to his ex-wife's house?" They waited, and 20 minutes later the front door opened. Jason emerged, followed by Melissa and, to Sarah's shock, a young boy, perhaps 8 years old. The child held Jason's hand, looking up at him with clear affection as they walked to Jason's car. "He has a son?" Rivera asked, confused. "I thought Miller didn't have kids." "So did I," Sarah replied, her earlier certainty now shaken. In 4 years of partnership, Jason had never once mentioned having a child. She made a quick decision. "I'm going to approach. Stay here as backup." Sarah got out of the car and walked openly toward Jason's vehicle, making no attempt to conceal her presence. Jason spotted her immediately, his face draining of color. He quickly stepped between her and the boy. "Thompson," he said, his voice strained. "What are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same thing, especially after your visit to Carter's attorney," Sarah replied, keeping her tone level despite the confusion and sense of betrayal swirling inside her. "You want to tell me what's going on, Jason? Who's this?" The boy peered around Jason's leg, curious but apprehensive. Jason's expression shifted from shock to resignation. "This is my son, Ethan," he said finally. "And this is complicated." "I've got time," Sarah said. "And after 4 years as partners, I think you owe me an explanation." 20 minutes later, they sat in a nearby park, Ethan playing on the swings within sight but out of earshot. Jason's story emerged in halting fragments, each revelation more disturbing than the last. 8 months ago, Ethan disappeared from his school playground. Jason began, his voice hollow. "Melissa and I have been divorced for 3 years, but we share custody. He was with her that week. The police investigation went nowhere. No witnesses, no evidence, nothing. Why didn't you tell me?" Sarah asked. "We could have helped." Jason shook his head. "Because 3 days after he disappeared, I received a phone call. A man, I later learned it was Richard Davis, told me that Ethan was safe, for now, that he would remain that way as long as I followed instructions. They were using your son as leverage," Sarah realized, the pieces clicking into place. "At first it was small things, warning them about patrol schedules, surveillance operations, targeting certain areas. Then it escalated. They wanted case information, evidence details, names of witnesses." Jason's hands trembled as he continued. "I knew it was wrong, but Ethan is my son. I couldn't risk his life, even to do the right thing." "The leak Wilson detected," Sarah said. "It was you." Jason nodded miserably. "I never met Wilson, didn't know he was undercover, but I passed information about suspicious taxi drivers being investigated. I might as well have signed his death warrant myself." So today, at Carter's attorney's office, they finally slipped up. In all these months, they never let me see Ethan, just sent occasional photos to prove he was alive. But today, Davis's arrest and Carter's detention has thrown their organization into chaos. The attorney told me where Ethan was being held, at a house belonging to one of the lower-level members, someone who panicked after the warehouse raids and was planning to flee with Ethan as insurance. Sarah's mind was reeling. Her partner, her friend, had been compromised in the most fundamental way, forced to choose between his oath as an officer and his love for his son. "Why didn't you come to me?" she asked. The question weighted with hurt and confusion. "We could have found another way." "They were watching me constantly," Jason replied. "They had people inside the department. One wrong move, one hint that I'd told anyone, and Ethan would disappear forever." His voice broke. "I couldn't take that chance." As they talked, Sarah's phone rang. The hospital where the rescued children were being treated and assessed. "Detective Thompson? This is Dr. Hernandez. We've identified one of the children from the third warehouse. The oldest girl, around 12. Her name is Alexandra Carter. Initial DNA testing indicates she's related to James Carter. We believe she's his daughter." Sarah felt as though the ground had shifted beneath her feet. "Are you certain?" "The genetic markers are conclusive. We're still investigating how she ended up in the trafficking network her father apparently operated, but she's asking to speak with you specifically. She says she has information about her father's operation." Sarah hung up, turning to Jason with a mix of emotions too complex to name. We need to go to the hospital. Now. And you need to tell Harrison everything. About Ethan, about your involvement with Carter's people. We'll arrange protection for your son, but I need you to come clean. Jason nodded, relief and fear warring in his expression. I will. I should have trusted you from the beginning. As they collected Ethan and headed for their vehicles, Sarah reflected on the cascade of revelations. Wilson as an undercover officer, Jason's impossible choice, and now the daughter of the trafficking kingpin herself, perhaps the key to understanding the final mysteries of the case. The truth, it seemed, was far more complex and painful than even she had imagined. Alexandra Carter sat in the hospital's private family room, her thin frame nearly swallowed by the oversized chair. At 12 years old, she carried herself with a preternatural composure that spoke of experiences no child should endure. Her light brown hair was neatly combed, her hospital gown replaced with donated clothes that hung on her underfed body. Only her eyes, dark, watchful, and far too knowing, betrayed the trauma she had survived. Sarah approached slowly, Max at her side. She had learned that abrupt movements could trigger panic in trafficking victims, especially children. Alexandra? I'm Detective Thompson. You asked to speak with me? The girl's gaze flicked between Sarah and Max, lingering on the German Shepherd with a flicker of interest. You can call me Alex, she said, her voice surprisingly steady. And yes, I have information about my father's operation. Sarah sat across from her, maintaining a respectful distance. I understand this must be difficult for you, Alex. Anything you can tell us will help ensure that your father and his associates can't hurt any more children. Alex's expression hardened. He's not my father. Not really. Not anymore. She took a deep breath. When I was 7, my mother died. Cancer. Dad, James, changed after that. Started drinking, became obsessed with his work. Then one day he brought home this man, Richard Davis. I overheard them talking about merchandise and shipments. I didn't understand what they meant until I saw the children. You witnessed the trafficking operation? Sarah asked gently. Alex nodded. At first, James kept me separate from it all, but I started asking questions about the children I glimpsed, about why certain rooms in our house were off limits. He told me they were the children of his business associates staying temporarily. Her voice took on a bitter edge. I knew he was lying. I found ways to talk to them when the guards weren't looking. They told me the truth. What happened then? Sarah prompted when Alex fell silent. I threatened to call the police. That was my mistake. Alex's composure cracked slightly, revealing the wounded child beneath. He looked at me like I was a stranger, or worse, an enemy. The next day, Davis came to my room and told me I was being sent to boarding school. Her laugh was hollow, devoid of humor. The boarding school was one of their processing facilities. My own father put me into his trafficking operation because I became a liability. Sarah fought to keep her expression neutral despite the horror churning inside her. Alex, I'm so sorry. I want to testify against him, the girl said firmly. I can identify at least 15 other men involved in the network, including 2 judges and a state senator. I have dates, locations, conversations I overheard. I kept track of everything, memorizing details because they took away anything I could write with. Sarah marveled at the girl's courage and presence of mind. In the midst of her own victimization, she had been gathering evidence, preparing for the day she might be free to speak. We'll arrange for you to make a formal statement, Sarah assured her. But right now, the priority is your safety and well-being. Is there any family you can stay with? Any relatives who weren't involved in your father's activities? Alex shook her head. My mother's sister lives in California. We used to visit her before Mom died. She never liked James. We'll contact her, Sarah promised. In the meantime, you'll stay in protective custody with specialized care for trafficking survivors. As Sarah rose to leave, Alex spoke again, her voice smaller now. Detective, what will happen to the other children? The ones who don't have anywhere to go? The question pierced Sarah's professional detachment, reminding her that beyond the case, beyond the evidence and arrests, were dozens of traumatized children facing uncertain futures. We have programs for them, foster care specializing in trauma recovery, psychological support, education. It won't be easy, but they'll have a chance at a real life now. Alex nodded, seemingly satisfied with the answer. As Sarah turned to go, Max unexpectedly moved closer to the girl, resting his head on the arm of her chair. Alex tentatively reached out to stroke his fur, the simple contact appearing to comfort her more than words could. "Could he stay a while?" she asked, looking up at Sarah with the first hint of childlike vulnerability she'd shown. "Of course," Sarah replied, unclipping Max's leash. Sometimes the most healing presence wasn't human at all. 3 days later, Sarah stood in the observation room at the Federal Detention Center, watching as James Carter was led into the interview room where federal prosecutors waited. He looked smaller somehow without his expensive suit and diplomatic credentials, clad now in standard-issue prison attire. His distinguished features, once commanding, seemed deflated by captivity. Harrison joined her at the window. The DA says with Alexandra's testimony, plus Davis's cooperation and the evidence from Wilson's undercover work, Carter's looking at multiple life sentences, no possibility of diplomatic intervention, no deals. "Good," Sarah said simply. "What about the girl?" Harrison asked. "Alexandra? Her aunt in California has agreed to take her. She flies out next week once the doctors clear her." Sarah watched as Carter took his seat across from the prosecutors. "She's remarkably resilient. The psychologists say she's processing her trauma in unusually healthy ways for someone who's been through so much." "Sometimes the strongest survivors come from the darkest situations," Harrison observed. "Speaking of which, how's Miller doing?" Jason had confessed everything to Internal Affairs, his coercion by Carter's organization, the information he'd passed, his efforts to protect his son while minimizing the damage he caused. Given the extraordinary circumstances and his eventual cooperation, he had been allowed to resign rather than face criminal charges, though his police career was irrevocably over. Ethan's in therapy, adjusting to being home. Jason's focused on being a father right now. Sarah's tone conveyed both forgiveness and the acknowledgement that some bridges couldn't be rebuilt. "He made an impossible choice. I can't say I would have done differently in his position." 1 year later, the lakeside park was alive with laughter as children raced across green lawns, played on swings, and splashed in the shallow water of the designated swimming area. To casual observers, it appeared to be nothing more than an ordinary summer picnic. But Sarah, watching from a bench with Max beside her, knew better. Every child playing under the watchful eyes of foster parents, therapists, and volunteers had been rescued from Carter's trafficking network. This gathering marked the 1-year anniversary of their freedom, a celebration of their progress and resilience. John, now 5, no longer flinched at sudden movements. He spoke in complete sentences, attended kindergarten, and had recently been adopted by a child psychologist and her husband who specialized in trauma recovery. He was currently engaged in an elaborate sandcastle construction project with 3 other former victims, their faces intent with concentration rather than fear. Lily, whose drawings had helped identify Carter, had developed into a talented artist whose work was being used in therapy programs for other traumatized children. Her new family, a retired teacher and a pediatric nurse, stood nearby, their expressions reflecting quiet pride in her progress. Alex had returned from California for the occasion, taller now and healthier, though her eyes still carried shadows of her experiences. She had become an advocate for trafficking survivors, speaking at schools and community centers about recognizing warning signs and protecting vulnerable children. "They're doing well," Harrison said, joining Sarah on the bench. He had taken over Parker's position permanently after proving himself a worthy successor, principled, compassionate, and immune to political pressure. "Better than anyone expected," Sarah agreed. "But there's still so much work to do." The aftermath of Carter's network had revealed the staggering scope of child trafficking in America. Thousands of victims, hundreds of perpetrators, operations spanning multiple states and countries. "Parker would be proud," Harrison said quietly, "of them and of you." Sarah nodded, throat tight with emotion. On her lap rested a small velvet box containing the Medal of Valor that had been posthumously awarded to Captain William Parker. His sacrifice had not been forgotten, nor had his legacy of integrity in a profession too often compromised by politics and pressure. As the afternoon sun began its descent toward the horizon, the children gathered for a group photo. Their faces, some smiling broadly, Others, more reserved but no longer haunted, represented both the darkest and brightest aspects of humanity, the capacity for cruelty, but also the remarkable resilience of the human spirit. Sarah felt Max shift against her leg, his attention focused on something across the park. Following his gaze, she spotted Jason standing at a respectful distance, Ethan beside him. He had called last week, asking permission to attend, wanting Ethan to see that good could come even from the darkest circumstances. She raised a hand in greeting, a simple gesture that conveyed forgiveness, if not quite the trust they had once shared. Jason nodded in acknowledgement, his expression conveying gratitude and regret in equal measure. As twilight approached, Sarah walked Max along the lakeshore, reflecting on the journey of the past year. The investigation had exposed corruption in places high and low, had cost lives and careers, had revealed both the worst of human depravity and the best of human courage. And at its heart had been a German shepherd's alert bark at an abandoned taxi, a small moment that had changed everything. "Good boy, Max," she murmured, rubbing his ears as they watched the children board buses to return to their new homes, their new lives. The work would continue tomorrow. There would always be more children to save, more networks to dismantle, more battles against the darkness. But for tonight at least, Sarah allowed herself to feel something that had been absent since Emily's disappearance all those years ago: hope. In the twilight of life, we often reflect on what truly matters. The police dog barked fiercely at the airport taxi, reminds us that evil exists, but so does extraordinary courage. Like Captain Parker, many of us have dedicated our lives to protecting the innocent, our children, grandchildren, and the vulnerable among us. Sarah Thompson's journey echoes our own struggles with loss, betrayal, and the search for justice in an imperfect world. We understand the impossible choices Jason faced as a father and the resilience shown by children like Alex who survive unimaginable trauma. The story speaks to our generation's deepest fears, that evil can hide behind respectability and power, but also to our highest hopes, that one person's dedication can break cycles of abuse and create paths to healing. As we watch our society change, sometimes in troubling ways, remember that the fight for what's right never ends. Our experience and wisdom remain vital. Like Max, whose simple loyalty saved lives, we can still make profound differences through small acts of compassion, vigilance, and courage. Evil may persist, but so does hope. And hope, ultimately, is stronger. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.